interviews. My name is Alia Almoayed and I'm a nutritional therapist and health consultant. I love learning about all the different ways you can improve and enhance your life, so I'd like to invite you to join me as I interview some very interesting people who are experts in their fields. The interviews are fun and casual, and I promise that you'll learn something interesting every time. To get more information, go to my website at www.alialmoayed.com. In the meantime, sit back and enjoy. I'm sitting here in Kerala, India, with Liza Borodkin. She's a cranio-sacral therapist, and I wanted to just have a chat with her to explain what cranio-sacral therapy is all about. I have had a couple of sessions with her, and the feeling I've had is something that I cannot exactly describe, and I wanted people to just understand a bit more about it from herself. I have had amazing results, and I still can't explain what it is. So Liz, how would you, if someone were to come and say, just explain to me very briefly what the general idea of cranio-sacral therapy is, what would you say?
Well, I sort of have different explanations to people depending on what the person wants to know, why they came to the therapy, and their general background with therapies and potentially alternative forms of treatment is. So I have different pitches, if you will, different ways to explain.
Okay.
A lot of the times I would start from addressing the person's symptom that they bring to me and saying, well, this is the symptom that you have, here's how cranio-sacral therapy can address it, because this is how it works. Okay. And all of these explanations are true, but there are just so many ways to explain what this work is, because the model of this work is very, very open. The way I like to explain it is by asking people at first, how do they know that something is alive? And in 99% of the times they would tell me, I know because it moves. And sometimes, for example, if we look at a tree doesn't exactly move, but there's this imperceptible movement that we can feel inside the tree. So that's the basic premise, is that life expresses itself as movement. And the most basic of all movements is a pulsating movement. It's a movement that constantly opens and closes, expands and contracts. And as it moves like this, you can see that it's basically a movement between two opposites. And another idea, and perhaps it's a philosophical idea, that life is actually based on the interplay of two opposites. All of life is based on duality, and how this play takes place between these two opposites, between the duality, or within the duality and with it. So this pulsating movement, opening, closing, rising up and down, expanding out and contracting back in, it's the most basic of all movements, and this is how life expresses itself. You can see this movement everywhere in nature. You can see it as close to ourselves as our own breath. Breath is expansion and contraction. You can see it as any cyclical movement in nature. For example, a day goes through its inhalation, expansion as it reaches its peak at noon, and then the day contracts back in and reaches that other bottom peak at midnight. Seasons go through the same. Earth expands and contracts. The entire universe pulsates all the time. Now, of course, that takes place at different speeds, and these movements are slightly different. But at the end of the day, all these natural movements that we see around us are pulsating movements. Tides, they do the same thing. So we have this pulsating movement inside of our bodies. Breath was one example that I gave you, but we also have this inner breath inside us. It's like a breath under the breath, this very slow, energetic pulsation that happens inside our body. And everything inside our body moves to that rhythm. All of our organs, our tissues, our fluids, our energy, internal energy. So it's like that tide that directs the movement of all the inner structures of our body. And that tide appears the moment we are conceived. So to some extent, it's like a recorder of our entire life experience, because by how this tide is expressed, I, as a craniosacral therapist, can tell what is going on with the body on all three levels. And by three levels, I mean physical level, emotional level, and spiritual level.
Mm-hmm.
So you can feel that even though everything in the body moves to that rhythm, there is a part of the body that doesn't move to that rhythm or moves very differently from the rest of that rhythm.
Mm-hmm.
You can think of it as seaweed in the ocean, all the seaweed moving very uniformly to the tide, and one seaweed is a bit stuck, or it's moving in an erratic kind of a way. Or there's a part of the sea that feels like a lake that's not moving, stagnant waters. So with our hands as craniosacral therapists, we're trained to perceive how tide expresses itself. And the rest is left to quantum physics, because the idea, and just about anybody from any therapy will tell you that at the end of the day, it's only the person's body that's capable of healing itself.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody can heal anybody else. The only thing somebody else can do is bring up your own ability to heal yourself. And by quantum physics, I mean that when the therapist recognizes what's happening in the patient's body, what the abnormalities are, and how the tide is expressed, the tide has the perfect ability to rebalance itself and do the healing work.
And how would you recognize, as a therapist, how would you go in to somebody's tide and recognize that there's something wrong? I mean, how do you do it?
Tide is perceptible to human hands.
Mm-hmm.
So the moment I put my hands on somebody, I can feel what is actually taking place.
And where do you put your hands?
It depends. It could be on the feet, it could be on the head, it could be under a person's lower back, it could be at the site of their injury. It's very individual. But craniosacral therapy is cranium, which is the head, and sacrum, which is the bottom part of the spine. So the idea is that most of abnormalities or obstructions of health, if you will, because health is ever present, that's another concept about craniosacral therapy, we never lose health. So when we work with health, the idea is that if at any time it's obstructed, it comes from most likely somewhere, someplace around the midline, which is between the cranium and the sacrum. Hence craniosacral therapy.
And is every single person receptive to that kind of therapy? I mean, would it work for me even if I didn't believe in it? Because you're talking about concepts that are not mainstream here, and somebody would the person need to be convinced for the therapy to work for them, or not?
It's a very good question, and my answer would be both yes and both no. This therapy works with everybody. Absolutely everybody, no matter what condition they're in, including whether or not they believe in it. The difference is between people who believe in it and not. No, I would even say the difference is a person might have conscious access and conscious awareness of what is actually happening to them on the table, and some people would not. Some people have come to me who are very energetically aware, if you will. For example, I've worked with some yogis who have been practicing for 20 odd years, and even though the work would be happening to them very strongly on the level where they usually have access, on the table, all of a sudden they don't really understand what's happening and they don't feel much. Yet I've had people who don't believe in any such thing and have never had any energy treatments, if you will, but the work accessed them and they could feel what happens on the table, and they were convinced by the work itself that it works because they just managed to feel what's happening on the table.
How would you explain that then? How would you explain a person who is supposedly aware of their body and comfortable with it versus the other person who has no idea and this works for them very well?
Because every practice that we do at the end of the day is conditioning, and the very nature of conditioning.
Sorry, this is a crow.
The very nature of conditioning is that it's limiting at some point.
Yeah.
You could have conditioning that's very limiting, and you could have conditioning that's less limiting, but at the end of the day, that is